Hi, I'm Laura Coltis, your host for Arts Delight. This week's guest is bronze sculptor Morgan MacDonald. There have been many stories done on Morgan, but because making a large bronze statue can be a long process, many of those television presentations are piecemeal. So we decided to follow the sculpting process from start to finish. Morgan begins by putting clay onto the iron armature. This brings him to the stage where he sculpts the actual detail of the figure, making it the most artistically demanding of the whole process. The model is then covered in silicone, which basically takes a detailed impression of the figure. The silicone figure is then covered by plaster to get it ready for the waxing process. Hot wax is then poured into the silicone plaster configuration. Once the wax has cooled, the plaster and silicone is removed, revealing a wax model that almost looks like the final product. From the wax model, ceramic impressions are then made, which are used for the bronze pouring. Molten bronze, which reaches temperatures of 2000 degrees centigrade or more, is then poured into the ceramic cast, making it the most dramatic part of the whole process. If you stay tuned, you'll get to see a sculpture that is truly an enduring, moving piece of art. Believe me, it's fascinating.
This show is brought to you by the Craft Council of Newfoundland and Labrador. Visit us in our new space at 275 Duckworth Street and discover what it means to be handcrafted.
Welcome back to the show. Let's start with Morgan showing us how he begins the long process of making a bronze statue.
The most difficult part of what I find of sculpture is getting the structure or the pose or the main composition, and this is really done by posing the armature, which is this metal, the metal that you see within this, this skeleton. You see, holding up the clay. Oh, yeah. One of the principal things that anybody starting off with sculpture will get wrong is that they think that they can start with a ball of clay like this and create a large structure. Sure. But unlike painting, where gravity is not inhibiting the free flowing clouds and birds, I have to think about how this physically supports itself. So the very first thing that you're fighting against with sculpture is gravity. It's the number one thing that you have to take into account when you're making this. It has to stand up. It has to withstand the forces that are on it. There's a great quote from Michelangelo that he basically says, if I can paraphrase it, take a sculpture and roll it down a hill, and everything that's left is the sculpture. So this is kind of what he's getting at, is the fact that the piece has to be, the core of it, the main thrust of the piece has to be right. Again, one of the things you always see people doing when they first start out with this is, I'm laying big chunks of clay on to try to get a structure. Most people, what they do is they'll try to smooth it out. They're like, I'm smoothing the clay to a point where it's going to be refined, so smooth, and the form is going to, it's just going to appear some way out of it. It's going to, but the reality is it's in the chunks of stuff that you add to it or take away, and one of the things you'll rarely see, somebody starting out sculpting is just doing something like that, and just carving hunks off of it, even though they're modeling, and this is where I get the question a lot about stone. Like, what do you find? Have you ever sculpted stone? Do you find that harder? And the answer is it's infinitely harder than modeling, which is this form of sculpture, which is just taking a ductile material and adding it and removing it. So there's a subtractive and an additive process to this. And with stone, the thought process is even more difficult, because it's a one-way road. You can only take away, and you can never add it back. So you have to be very careful of the removal process, because you could remove the piece that really should stay there,
Certainly.
which is part of the form.
So this process can be, let's say, forgiving.
It's very forgiving that way, and it's more forgiving than drying actually. The only con, or in the pro and con versus the ease of use is the armature. The armature is a major impediment to capturing the form. It's like this a bit of engineering thrown in with creating the piece. And in fact, when these things get so large, it actually is literally an engineering problem, because then you're talking about stresses on material sciences, and whether it's going to hold up to wind loads, snow loads,
Right.
and things that a painter would never have to take into account.
The next stage is probably the most artistically satisfying part of the whole process. Stay tuned as Morgan gives more definition to this particular clay sculpture.
This show is brought to you by the Craft Council of Newfoundland and Labrador. Visit us in our new space at 275 Duckworth Street and discover what it means to be handcrafted.
Welcome back to our show. I'm Morgan MacDonald. The next step of the sculpting process is probably the most demanding, at the same time being the most artistically satisfying part of the process.
This must be the kind of very rewarding part. You're classified, let's say, as a bronze sculpture, and there's the technical part of it, and the slog part, I suppose, pouring the bronze and whatever. But this seems like a real aspect of your art. This must be a fun part for you, a rewarding part.
Yeah, this is really where it's at. I think it's it's the most fun. It's where the real, the artwork, the sculpture comes together in in the creative process. This is because what you see is what you get, and that's the finished product.
Right.
Unlike painting, when you're finished the painting, it's done, and you can stand back and enjoy it and appreciate the work. One of the things that it's sort of more difficult from a mentally challenging point of view, because when I'm done this and I've finally satisfied or leaving the sculpture, abandoning it. Shouldn't say satisfied, but it's still not finished. But a painting is done when you've put that last brush stroke. Unlike sculpture, when I've done the last stroke with these sculpting tools, it's not done.
That's right. You got a lot more steps to go
There's
through.
a lot more to do. So this is where the two crafts or trades, or again, I know there's a lot of debate where craft and art leave off, but I'm not really going to get into that, because that's not really what I'm what I'm talking about here, because it's more or less the two trades of the foundry, which is the casting, the creation of this. And there's an area within that trade itself for creativity and art to come into that practice. But for the majority of artists, what they do is they'll take a piece like this sculpture, this clay,
Sure.
and they'll take that to a foundry to cast. And a lot of times, this is where a lot of people are confused about the process, and like, well, what do you mean? It's like there's sculpture. Well, the problem with this is it doesn't last. It's ephemeral. It's clay. This doesn't dry. It's fragile and non-permanent. And that's why you do the bronze casting is
Certainly, yeah.
is to it's like the recording of a song. You want to have it for posterity. You want to have it to enjoy for later.
Now, you this is going to be a Beathic chief. What's going through your mind when you're doing this part? Like, this might be an unfair parallel, because some people they carve something out of, or sculpt something on a piece of marble, or even do something with wood, and they say the wood kind of spoke to me. Do you have a sense like that with this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I'm surprised actually you would,
yeah,
because of the fact that this is not wood, it's not something solid.
it's, yeah, I mean, like, I guess with a piece of wood, because it's something natural, it grows, it innately has a character to it. It's something that's been in the forest for 30, 40, 50 years, and it takes on a certain character, unlike this clay, which is basically a manufactured product. But when I'm doing this, it's kind of like if you're looking at clouds in the sky, you might see something that jumps out at you, except that the fact that instead of clouds, you're able to sculpt the clay and kind of tease it out a bit more and bring out what you see in the character. And so just for an example with this, I might start with the technical knowledge of the anatomy or whatever, but then I kind of see the character of the face and try to pull that out, and I see a personality within that, and it's like I get the question a lot of the times, well, who did you base that off of? Who's your model? And people kind of get upset with me, and I say, I just made it up, I invented it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that process works is, oh, I see something in there.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is here is a Beothuk chief. What's going on in your mind when you're doing this and relating to, let's say, the end product at the end of the day?
Well, where this is a particular individual, historical figure, I'm trying to think of, characteristic traits, from from an anthropological viewpoint, and what that might, what might this person have looked like, and trying to gather some inspiration from the history of the this particular subject. And so trying to get into the headspace of this, I find it helps to do a bit of reading and a bit of research, and looking at other work that's out there, or even just reading some of the stories about this. So in effect, trying to capture the essence of what it is you're creating.
Well, I mean, this Beothuk chief, of course, we all know about Beothuks and how it wasn't very pleasant at the end. Is that playing a part in this sculpture here?
Oh, well, absolutely. It's again, in the climate that we're in, I guess from our own history and how we relate to the place that we live in. We're all familiar with the Beothuk story, but again, I'm trying to, that's the power of art, is that it can bring to life something that's long lost. The imagination is, it's a powerful thing, and I think that by highlighting this and appreciating this, this lost culture, I think it would be great to bring some more, attention to it, and thought towards, what we've really lost here culturally, and from a historical point of view, and even the present. And oftentimes I think about, what if the Beothuk were still here? What if today they were with us, and in modern times, and what that would look like for the provinces. And I've often thought about, at what point would I not do this in clay? Because there's certain forms that you don't need to sculpt it in clay. Like if I were to make a cube, what would be the point in sculpting the clay?
Yes.
And then putting all kinds of detail into that cube, and spending so much time planing down the edges in clay to make a mold of the cube, when you could just buy plate and weld it together.
Right, yeah.
So there's a certain amount of that you have to realize, that the method that when you're sculpting dictates the end result of what you're trying to achieve.
The final phase of the process consists of many steps. Stay tuned and you'll see the final product, a beautiful bronze statue.
This show is brought to you by the Craft Council of Newfoundland and Labrador. Visit us in our new space at 275 Duckworth Street and discover what it means to be handcrafted.
Welcome back to the last segment of the show. To get to the final stage of this whole process, there are several technical steps that have to be attended to. Let's get Morgan to walk us through it all.
We've got the clay sculpture done. Can you explain to me the process of going from that step to the final bronzing step?
Absolutely. I think there's a disconnect in what people think about the process, and they have the romantic view of the artist kind of sculpting, but then trying to realize what the bronze is about. A lot of people think you dip it in bronze or you're actually carving the bronze, but there's a process of making molds. You have to create an impression. Like bronze itself isn't physically sculpted. You're not chiseling it like it's a piece of marble or sculpting it like it's a piece of clay. So from that point on, once you have your clay sculpture, and the artistic, the artist's vision is kind of done then, and you're creating a mold from that. So in kind of literal technical terms, you're pouring silicone over it, taking an impression of it, then you're backing it up with a mother mold, which is like fiberglass or plaster. And back in the old days, they would have used a lot of plaster of Paris, and this is where the connection comes in with sculpture. But once you've created that mold, and this is where I lose a lot of people in kind of the thinking about the process, is that you have to make another mold. So in this continuum of linear steps, step one is to create the clay, step two is to create the silicone mold, which takes an impression of the clay, and then you create a wax copy in the silicone mold. And so at that point the questions I get are, well, why are you even making a wax copy? Well, the point of that is that the wax itself is, because of the properties of the material, wax melts. It melts at a relatively low temperature. It lends itself to making a mold that's easily used to pour bronze. So we melt bronze, we heat it up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and we literally have a pot of molten bronze at a very, very high temperature, which is dangerous to work with, and at those temperatures there's very little, there's very few materials that hold their structural shape. So this is why we have to make that secondary mold in order to bridge that gap from clay to bronze, is that we make a ceramic mold that withstands those temperatures.
Something on the forks. Yeah. We'll catch on fire. Keep going, keep going.
Oh, that's hot. Give it another
Give her a good
spin.
scrape. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Good. You want me to skim again?
It's good. It's good.
Bit of carbon buildup, but
Down. A little bit more.
and that we can pour 2,000 degree Fahrenheit bronze into that won't instantly ignite the mold or ignite the clay. Because if you think about it logically, taking liquid hot bronze and splashing it over some clay or dipping your clay sculpture in a pot of molten bronze, what are you going to get? You're just going to get a fire from the clay, and you're not going to get anything that's worth saving. And then if you think about it, the other end of the spectrum, which is you take a piece of solid bronze in a big block and you carve that. Well, that's also not conducive to creating the kind of detail that you see in the sculpture, which fingerprint level quality detail that's like very subtle, supple kind of sculptural detail. You're not going to get that with power tools or files or chiseling metal with metal. It's not. So this is where what this place is, a lost wax foundry. This tradition of bronze casting, that 6,000-year-old tradition. That's what we're doing. We're just one place in the long continuum of creating these sculptures, practicing that tradition. So you're melting bronze and you're pouring it into a vessel that's the mold, which will shape the piece into the final sculpture that you want to have and enjoy for generations. So
in many respects now we've kind of come to the end process here with this sculpture. I'm always amazed that when you do have a bronze sculpture, the detail, I mean, you can see creases and crevices on this person's face here, and I've seen some of the masters you've done. Someone's had a beard, you can see the hair and everything, So it's quite a process.
Appreciate it, because once, when you see the finished piece in metal, it's like it's almost unbelievable that you can have something captured in that level of detail in something that's so durable and impossible to kind of manipulate. It's not something that lends itself to any kind of change, and so that's what's kind of,
well, that's the appeal of it.
That's the appeal of it. It's timeless.
Yes, exactly. Well, Morgan, this has been quite a journey. I was delighted to find out that we could follow this process right from the start, plus to the end here. We got an incredible sculpture, and anyway, it's just been a great journey, Morgan, and thanks very much for letting us in on every step of it.
Oh, you're more than welcome, and I hope that the viewers will get a much deeper appreciation and understanding of the level of skill and craftsmanship that goes into producing something so lasting and timeless.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks again.
You're welcome.
What a beautiful piece of art. It's been well worth the wait. See you next week.